It is 2 a.m. inside a small, dimly lit Tokyo apartment. A newborn begins to stir. A tiny whimper breaks the silence, accompanied by a subtle shifting of blankets. But instead of a full-blown, lung-busting scream shattering the night, there is only a soft rustle. The Japanese mother is already there, scooping the baby up in absolute quiet, decoding the need before the crisis even begins. Why do Japanese babies cry significantly less in their first few months of life compared to Western infants? Is this a genetic miracle, or is there a hidden developmental secret the modern world has entirely forgotten? Across the globe, exhausted parents are often told to let their babies cry it out, hoping to foster early independence. But what if this well-meaning advice is actually pushing a fragile nervous system into sheer panic? And this is where the misunderstanding begins. We have been taught to wait for the scream, entirely missing the vital conversation happening right before it. Today we are decoding the cultural and psychological blueprint of Japanese parenting. We will explore the attachment science behind raising a profoundly calm child, proving that building a resilient nervous system starts long before the tears even fall. The central conflict in modern parenting often stems from a dangerous misconception: the belief that letting a baby cry strengthens their lungs, or that responding too quickly will inevitably spoil them. In reality, developmental psychology reveals a much starker truth. Newborns possess absolutely no capacity to self-soothe. When a baby is left to cry it out, it is not an exercise in building independence. It is a rapid escalation into a biological crisis. Scientific studies measuring infant stress responses show that when babies are left to cry alone, their brains are flooded with cortisol, a potent stress hormone. Even when the baby eventually falls silent, their heart rate and cortisol levels often remain alarmingly high. They haven't learned to calm down. They have simply given up, overwhelmed by a dysregulated nervous system. In stark contrast, Japanese infant care minimizes this severe emotional disconnect. Research indicates that infants raised in the Japanese model of continuous proximity not only cry significantly less, but also experience longer, deeper sleep cycles. But what looks gentle on the surface is doing something much deeper. This isn't about rushing to soothe a screaming child. So how do Japanese parents prevent these explosive meltdowns before they even begin? The answer lies in a highly attuned observation skill that most of the modern world has entirely overlooked. In the Western world, there is a common parenting reflex: wait until the baby clearly cries to intervene. The underlying fear is that responding too quickly to every whimper might create a clingy, overly dependent child. But in Japan, waiting for the tearful explosion is seen as a missed opportunity. Instead, Japanese parents practice the subtle art of anticipation, decoding the quiet signals before the storm even begins. Before a newborn ever lets out a wail, their body communicates through a series of micro-movements. A sudden shift in breathing rhythm, darting eye movements beneath closed lids, rooting, or a restless squirm. These are the pre-cry cues. By stepping in during this crucial 30-second window of early restlessness, a Japanese mother addresses the need, whether it is hunger, a diaper change, or just a desire for closeness, while the infant's nervous system is still relatively stable. Are you accidentally forcing your child to scream just to prove they need your attention? Developmental psychologists refer to this proactive soothing as co-regulation. A newborn's brain is not equipped to process stress alone. When a parent steps in calmly and early, the infant literally borrows the adult's regulated nervous system to stabilize their own, keeping them safely anchored in a parasympathetic, resting state. Over time, this consistent early intervention teaches the infant's brain that the world is a highly predictable and safe environment. But here is where people usually get it wrong. To an outside observer, this immediate constant response might look like the ultimate form of spoiling. It appears as though the parent is catering to the child's every whim. However, what looks gentle on the surface is doing something much deeper. This hyper-responsive care isn't creating a fragile child. It is actually laying the groundwork for a psychological fortress, a profound state of unconditional trust that the Japanese call by a very unique name. Enter Amae gan-e. Rooted in the verb amaeru, it roughly translates to the desire to depend on another's unconditional love, to bask in their indulgence completely without any fear of rejection. In many Western cultures, there is a distinct, almost anxious rush toward early autonomy. Parents are frequently advised to transition infants to their own cribs in separate rooms as soon as possible, to stick to rigid feeding schedules, or to limit physical holding so they do not accidentally create bad habits. The fear of spoiling a child looms over almost every maternal interaction. Japanese parenting, however, completely reverses this reflex. Instead of pushing for forced, premature independence, they lean heavily into the infant's absolute helpless dependence. This approach is not merely a cultural sentiment, it aligns perfectly with what developmental science defines as secure attachment theory. Research consistently demonstrates that when an infant's physical and emotional needs are met generously and immediately during their first months of life, they form a profound sense of basic trust. The Japanese manifest Amae through constant skinship, extensive physical closeness, traditional co-sleeping, and frequent baby wearing. A mother does not view an infant's desire to be held as an act of manipulation, but rather as a non-negotiable biological necessity. Think about it for a moment. If a child cannot fully trust the very person keeping them alive to answer their quietest needs, how can they ever confidently navigate the unpredictability of the outside world? By filling the child's emotional cup of dependence to the absolute brim, the child eventually feels secure enough to detach naturally. But this intense early closeness often leaves observers wondering, if Japanese parents are so profoundly attached, how do their children ever learn to be self-sufficient? This is where the dynamic radically shifts. Because the moment a Japanese child begins to take their first wobbly steps, the parent transitions into an entirely different and arguably much harder form of love. Imagine a toddler visibly struggling to reach a toy just outside their grasp. A modern Western parent might instinctively rush in, handing over the toy to prevent a looming meltdown. A Japanese parent, however, will likely stand back, stay silent, and simply watch. This intentional pause is the essence of Mimamoru, Janshu-ru, translating to a combination of miai, to look, and mamoru, to protect. This philosophy is the conscious choice to observe a child's struggles without immediately rescuing them, intervening only when there is genuine physical danger. From a developmental psychology standpoint, this practice is known as productive struggle. When a child is allowed to face a manageable challenge, like figuring out how to stand up after a harmless tumble or mastering a frustrating physical task, their prefrontal cortex actively fires. They are not just playing, they are neurologically wiring their brain for lifelong resilience and emotional regulation. But here is what most well-meaning parents do not realize. Every single time you swoop in to save your child from a minor frustration, you are accidentally stealing their opportunity to build physical and emotional competence. The modern reflex of helicopter parenting, driven by a desperate urge to keep children constantly comfortable, often backfires, creating kids who crumble at the very first sign of friction. The Japanese approach offers a highly practical alternative, the 5-second pause. The next time your child encounters a mild obstacle and starts to whine, do not rush to fix it. Stop, breathe, and count to 5. Give them the crucial space to find their own solution. How many times have you unintentionally robbed your child of a critical growth moment simply because you were too impatient to wait? Allowing freedom through careful observation builds tremendous resilience. But if this freedom lacks a definitive boundary, it can quickly devolve into pure behavioral chaos. To anchor this independence, Japanese parents rely on an invisible rhythmic structure, which brings us to the fourth and final pillar. The profound calmness of Japanese children is not a genetic accident or a lucky biological trait. It is the result of a meticulously crafted psychological environment. It begins with the early anticipation of a newborn's subtle cues, deepens through the unconditional security of Amae, expands into the observant freedom of Mimamoru, and is ultimately anchored by the gentle, predictable rhythms of Shitsuke. A baby's cry is never a manipulation tactic. It is the sound of a fragile nervous system desperately searching for a safe harbor. Raising a remarkably calm, self-regulated child does not start with forcing premature independence or implementing reactive punishments. It begins the very moment we choose to become the calm, steady anchor they need to navigate an overwhelming world. But if you take away just one thing today, let it be this. You do not need to rewrite your entire parenting philosophy overnight. Start small. Try pausing for just 5 seconds the next time your toddler struggles, or simply offer a longer, unconditional embrace tonight. If this cultural perspective shifted the way you view your child's behavior, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. As we wrap up this journey into Japanese parenting, please hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into child psychology and cultural insights. Keep in mind that the information shared in this video is for educational purposes, grounded in developmental psychology and cultural observations. Every child is incredibly unique with their own biological temperament. Therefore, this content is not intended to replace professional medical, psychological, or educational advice from your pediatrician or a qualified specialist.